Hi everyone, welcome to Tales of Dread. This video is about a Boy Scout who grows up to be a park ranger. On his way home from school, he takes a shortcut through the woods and runs into something. Here is his story. If you're new to the channel, you might want to subscribe, click on the bell, give the channel a big thumbs up, and tell a friend. Let's make this scary for whoever finds it. I'm not sure what to call this thing. I don't even know what to think about all of this. It's almost paradoxical. I'm a jumbled mess when I don't have a drink in my hand, but the alcohol calms my mind enough that I can put together the right words to say what I need to say. Before I went back to drinking, I had been sober for almost 10 years. Now, the bottle is the only thing that keeps me from going crazy. What used to be my biggest problem is now the only thing that gives me the strength to get through this, no matter what happens. At the very least, I can say I did everything I could to stop more accidents and deaths. If you're reading this, I'm sure you've already called the police after seeing what looks like the set of a slasher movie from the 1980s. What I know for sure will be pieces of flesh all over the cabin is my eye. Will almost certainly be nearly impossible because there won't be much left to find. So, yes, Alex Sherman's blood and guts are all that's left of him. He was the park ranger for these woods for about 20 years. I spent my whole life protecting and preserving the woods, becoming one with nature and making sure that all the families and explorers were safe and always made it back home. Even though I know now that I can't help anyone, I can't help myself. Let me start from the beginning so that you, whoever finds this, can figure out what's going on and figure out how to stop it. But first, let me get another drink. I don't have much time, so I want to get as much as I can while I can. My dad grew up in a family that didn't have a lot of money or resources, so he had to learn to be on his own. He made a name for himself and worked his way up the corporate ladder until he was making enough money to give his family a safe and loving home. My father liked to live through my brother and me. He would always tell us stories about how, when he was a kid, he would watch other kids take karate classes, music lessons, and join the Boy Scouts. So you figured it out? When dear old dad put us in these classes and pushed us to do well in them, we became like his projects. I never really cared much about karate in music, but being out in nature made me feel like a Boy Scout, and I liked that right away. The clean air, catching fish, and cooking them on our own was the most rewarding and fulfilling thing about any scout group trip. You knew I'd be eagerly waiting at the crack of dawn, with my bags packed and ready to go on whatever trip was planned. Georgie, who was 3 years younger than me, didn't like being outside like I did. He had the amazing gift of being able to pick up any musical instrument and learn how to play it so quickly that it seemed impossible. From the time he was 10 years old. When I first joined the Boy Scouts, I became more and more sure that I could not only survive, but also thrive in the great outdoors. By the time I was 16, all I could think about was the Boy Scouts. School was just a small part of life that I had to go through. The good thing, because there's always a silver lining, is that I get to walk home from school because I decided not to do anything after school. I got to be in the world I loved so much. And every day on my way home was the first time I saw a truly wild part of nature. On one of these crazy walks home, I was about to turn 17 and we lived in a small town. Most of the architecture was made up of old colonial buildings. I guess people don't have the money to develop the land much more or just don't see the point in doing so. The lack of progress gave the impression that our lovely little town was almost stuck in time. Nature was left alone and grew on its own. People in our town didn't see any reason to cut down trees or keep the beautiful woods and forests that were there. Even though I love how easy it is to get into the woods and wander deeper into nature, the thickets of the forest were really beautiful. Because there were so many trees, it was almost impossible to tell the difference between day and night. It seemed like a separate world. I found it by accident when I went deep into the forest. Near the path I would walk on, there was a deer head in a pool of blood. I knew about the food chain and that animals do, in fact, eat one another. But this didn't feel the same. 6 years in the Boy Scouts taught me a lot about wildlife, but seeing a deer's head ripped off seemed strange. If it was to be eaten, it seemed like a kill for the main purpose of mutilating the animal, which bothered me. I kept going along the path. I felt a strange sense of courage because I thought I knew enough to avoid or stop being attacked myself. I found another one a little farther down the path. The deer had one of its legs torn off, leaving a string of tendons visible. Its intestines and other body parts were lying next to it. Whatever had killed. As the deer moved down the path, it looked like it was dropping pieces of it. I had never smelled blood and death before, and I quickly lost my courage when I threw up my lunch in the bushes. With so few carnivores hiding in the forest, it didn't seem like they could cut up animals. Who would be so disgusting as to rip another animal apart and put the pieces all over for a horrible show? Soon, I knew the answer when a strange sound broke through the quiet chirping and buzzing of the forest. It sounded like every tortured soul in hell screamed at the same time. The volume and intensity of the scream made it possible to figure out how close or far away the sound came from. My knees gave out and my blood froze. I felt wet as soon as I realized that the blood from the killed deer had run all the way down the path to where I had just thrown up and then passed out. The screams started up again, and this time I could almost feel the sound, whatever it was. Everyone else in the forest seemed to stop moving when they heard the screams. After the screams stopped, all I could hear was my heart beating very fast. A branch broke behind me, which made me jump up and turn around. When I tried to fight or run away, I broke more branches. I was still. From the direction where the branches broke, a low growl, grunt, and snarl were heard. Then it was quiet. I stood there, not sure if I should run or act like I was dead, and hoped that the smell of my blood would make them think it was theirs. My ears rang, and I felt like I couldn't hear anything. An explosion from a gunshot shook the forest, and I started crying because I was scared and confused. Another shot was fired from somewhere I couldn't see, but I could see tree bark flying where the projectiles had broken through the thicket of trees. I lost track of how many shots were fired, but the sound of snapping branches made it clear that whatever was in the woods was now moving away from me. Instead of coming up to me from where the snarls were, I was pulled up and saw him through my tears. The park ranger stood in front of me with his rifle slung over his shoulder. As I gathered myself, he quickly pulled me back over the deer head and along the path to the cabin, which was slightly off the path where he was based. After making sure I wasn't hurt, he poured 2 full cups of whiskey and drank his in one gulp. He then poured a second cup and waved for me to join him. Even though the whiskey burned as I drank it, the warmth it gave me made me feel a little bit better. By the time I finished my first cup, the ranger had already drunk about 4. I asked for another and tried to drink it in the same way. He didn't believe any of it. I thought I was dreaming as the ranger told me what little he knew about the creature. His name tag said Joel, and he showed me a scrapbook full of drawings and Polaroid pictures as he talked about how many animals had been cut up. The monsters that Joel drew scared me. After I first saw them, I dreamed about them for years. The red eyes he painted were so well done that they seemed to move. On the pages were Polaroids of many, many animals that had been torn apart. Guts and intestines were draped over tree branches and across forest paths, and heads with dead eyes were lying in the forest like rocks or logs. He told me that the dates on the photos showed that whatever this was, it seemed to live and work in a cycle. He had been a park ranger for 30 years. In that time, the creature had gone through 3 cycles. He didn't know where it came from or where it went, but it showed up every 10 years like clockwork. He didn't know what it was weak against, but high-caliber bullets seemed to hurt it at least. He said he tried to tell the police and other nearby authorities, but they laughed at the idea that a red-eyed demon had killed animals. He knew I would believe him because I'd heard it before. He could tell by the look on my face that I would never forget it. He told me that based on what he had seen, the cycle was coming to an end, but he would walk me home and keep watching the woods until he was sure. For now, he didn't seem to care if I tried to tell people what had happened or not. He had tried for 30 years and was fighting this on his own, so it was clear that being believed didn't matter to him at all. His age was obvious, and the horrors he had seen while fighting on his own for so long had made it worse. The next year, when I turned 18, I finished school and applied to be a park ranger. I knew I had 9 years to learn as much as I could from Joel to be ready to take over and protect the town from whatever this thing was. I hoped that the 2 of us could do together what Joel had been trying to do on his own for decades. Joel did everything he could to stop me from joining his fight. It was almost as if he knew it was an impossible battle with no chance of winning. When he saw that I was determined to help him, he let me into the cabin and gave me a Remington 700 rifle and a bottle of Jack Daniels. According to Joel, these are 2 things you need to survive and stay sane in the forest alone.